Good afternoon to those joining us, and still good morning to those out west. I'm Nicole Porter, Senior Director of Advocacy for the Sentencing Project, a research advocacy and communications organization based in Washington, D.C. that advocates for effective and humane responses to crime that minimize imprisonment and criminalization of youth and adults by promoting racial, ethnic, economic, and gender justice. Documenting and challenging life sentences is a strategic priority for the Sentencing Project. We are guided by the punitive sentences that have driven and sustained mass incarceration for over 50 years. Today, we are hosting a virtual discussion on a national report released just last month that updates the numbers of persons impacted by life and virtual life sentences. Behind the numbers are people who have been disappeared to life sentences, given the overly punitive sentences that dominate state and federal criminal codes across the United States. In conversation with the Sentencing Project this afternoon are our colleagues and partners who have survived life sentences. Let me provide an overview of the conversation, and then we'll get started with the discussion. For the conversation, I'm going to introduce our panelists, and we are going to start with an overview by the Sentencing Project's Celeste Berry, who will present on the recent report, A Matter of Life, the scope and impact of life and long-term imprisonment in the United States. On the other side of Celeste's comments, we will have a conversation with our panelists and leave room for discussion and Q&A before we wrap up at the top of the hour. To foster that dialogue, we want to encourage those in the audience to use the Q&A function so we can try to get to as many questions as possible. And do use the chat as is already happening. There's a lot of activity in the chat, and oftentimes people share resources and information relevant to the webinar in the chat. There are many experts on these issues, and given the moment we're in, many people who have survived life sentences who are now working in the movement. Let me introduce the panelists. Celeste Berry co-authored the A Matter of Life report with Dr. Ashley Nellis. Celeste supports the Sentencing Project's program campaigns with administrative, research, and grant management assistance. And prior to joining the Sentencing Project, she interned with the Seattle Clemency Project, where her work for criminal justice reform began. William Bill Underwood is a senior fellow at the Sentencing Project for the campaign to end life imprisonment. In January 2021, Bill received compassionate release from federal prison after serving 33 years on a life sentence. With 0 infractions during his over 3 decades of imprisonment, Bill was the inspiration for Senator Booker and then Congresswoman Bass's Second Look Act. Jason Hernandez is a board member with the Sentencing Project and survived life without parole sentence, a federal life without parole plus 320-year sentence for a nonviolent drug offense in 1998 at the age of 21. 14 years into his sentence, Jason started his own grassroots organization in prison called Crack Open the Door, which advocated for persons disappeared to life without parole sentences for crack cocaine offenses. In 2011, Jason prepared his own petition for commutation and sent it to then President Obama, along with a letter asking for his sentence to be reduced, becoming one of the first to receive clemency from President Obama. Jason launched his own leadership initiative for Latino high school students called At Last, Aspiring Texas Latinos Achieving Success Together, and opened a nonprofit grocery store, La Tienda. I may have butchered the pronunciation on that. I apologize, Jason, in his old neighborhood. And last but not least, we're joined by Robert Salim Holbrook, who is the executive director of Pennsylvania's Abolitionist Law Center. Salim is a former juvenile lifer who survived 27 years in Pennsylvania's adult state prisons, including a total of 10 years in solitary confinement, after being sentenced to life without parole for an offense he was involved with at the age of 16. Salim was released in 2018 after the Supreme Court ruled that mandatory life without parole sentences for youth are unconstitutional. So those are who we're going to be in conversation with today, but we'll start again with Celeste's presentation of the recent Sentencing Project report, A Matter of Life. So Celeste, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Great, thank you so much. All right, yes, again, thank you everyone for being here. As Nicole said, I'm one of the authors of this report, and I'm really looking forward to digging into our findings here. So our research continues to show us that life sentences are not an effective public safety strategy. And beyond that, they broaden racial disparities, deny the recognition of rehabilitation, and incarcerate people for years or even decades beyond the point of dangerousness. And our nation's embrace of these sentences has had really, truly devastating consequences for individuals and for communities. So as you can see up here on the screen, since 2003, every 4 years, the Sentencing Project has released a national census of people serving life sentences, which includes those serving life with the possibility of parole, life without the possibility of parole, and virtual life sentences, which are sentences reaching a maximum of 50 years or more. And so with this sixth report, the Sentencing Project is continuing to shine a light on the scope and impact of life sentences in the United States, with the hope that these findings and recommendations will continue to contribute to a more humane and effective criminal legal system. And to add some context to the research, so as with past years for this report, we reached out to all 50 state departments of corrections and the Federal Bureau of Prisons, asking them to complete a survey offering the total number of people serving each of these 3 life sentences, as well as the numbers of individuals across different age, sex, race, and crime of conviction groups. And for this report, we're also excited to share that we're currently working on making the data from this research publicly available. So make sure to check back on the report landing page for updates on data access. So in my overview today, I'm going to start with our top-level findings and then dig into some of these demographic analyses, including the characteristics of people serving life sentences across the country, the crimes of conviction for these life sentences, and then I will conclude with policy recommendations for reform. All right, so beginning with trends in life imprisonment. As you can see with this graph, we have the total number of people serving life sentences for each year that we collected data, broken down by sentence type. And I should note this green bar that you're seeing at the top represents those serving virtual life sentences, and we only began collecting that data in 2016. So as you can see, in 2024, we did find a slight decrease in the total number of people serving life sentences from about 204,000 in 2020 to now just shy of 195,000. And the majority of this decrease came from the life with parole population, that bottom blue bar. But importantly, we found an increase in the number of people serving the most severe of the 3 sentences studied here, life without the possibility of parole, represented by the middle dark bar. And in fact, in 2024, that year marked the largest ever total population of those serving life without the possibility of parole. So in this research, as we saw, we reported on the enormous scope of life sentences nationwide. But within the report, we also included profiles of individuals directly impacted by the United States expansion of life sentences. And so I wanted to share some of the faces behind these numbers. So Frederick Page, he's serving a virtual life sentence in Pennsylvania. Sherry McDonald is serving life in Oklahoma. Kamonte Carter, he was sentenced to life without parole in Washington. He was released in 2022 thanks to the state's expansion of juvenile life without parole protections. And then Michael Montalvo, he was sentenced to life without parole in 1982, but since the release of a report, Michael received clemency from President Biden, and as of just about a week ago, he is now free. All right, so turning again to some of these top-line findings from our research. We found that 1 in 6 people in US prisons is serving a life sentence, a proportion that has reached an all-time high, even as crime rates are near record lows. And this figure must be interpreted alongside the finding that the total number of life sentenced individuals has gone down since 2020. So the life sentenced population has decreased, but has done so at a slower rate than the broader prison population, which reveals that efforts aimed at reducing mass incarceration have excluded reforms for those serving extreme sentences. So in collecting data on the racial and ethnic makeup of this group, we found that over 2/3 of those serving life sentences are people of color, and nearly half of the total population is Black. And I should say we found even larger disparities among those serving life without the possibility of parole. Again, that's the most serious of the sentences studied here. So another important part of this research was looking at the number of elderly individuals serving a life sentence. Over a third of the life sentence population fall in this 55 and up category. And this was a particularly troubling finding, as we know that these individuals have typically aged out of crime and pose minimal risk of reoffending. All right, so turning to the other end of the age spectrum, I want to offer a closer look at our research on emerging adults. So these are adults between the ages of 18 and 25. So in recent years, the US Supreme Court has offered protections for youth by, for example, ruling mandatory juvenile life without parole is unconstitutional. And some states, including Washington, California, and Michigan, have expanded on those rulings to include protections for older age groups. But in pushing for national reforms, recognizing the cognitive developmental similarities between those under 18 and those between the ages of 18 and 25, this report provides the first of its kind state-by-state analysis of individuals serving life sentences who were under 25 at the time of their offense. So representing over a third of the total life sentence population, this research found that nearly 70,000 individuals were under 25, were not yet fully cognitively developed at the time of their offense. And of that 70,000, nearly a third are serving a life sentence without the possibility of parole. So we also took a look at the racial and ethnic composition of the under 25 age group. So that's the top bar here versus older adults represented by the bottom graph. And so broken down by race, you can see that among the youth and emerging adult category, Black and Latino individuals represent a greater share of the total as compared to the older adults. And so this confirms that racial disparities are more pronounced for those sentenced to life for an offense committed under the age of 25. All right, turning now to an overview of the crimes of conviction for the life sentenced population. The vast majority of those serving life were convicted of a violent crime, with about 60% being incarcerated for a homicide offense. But it's important to note and to give some context to these numbers. So in some states, a substantial proportion of these individuals have been convicted of something called felony murder, wherein the individual did not intend to kill or perhaps themselves did not kill the victim. Nonviolent crimes, which in our data set include drug and property crimes, represent about 3% of the total number of people serving life. And that might seem like a small share of the total. It is a small share of the total, but it's important to highlight that 3% represents over 6,000 individuals who committed a nonviolent crime, yet are being subjected to life in prison. So these figures are the products of deeply flawed crime control methods and are representative of larger criminal legal injustices. So as such, in alignment with our broader policy priorities, we've developed the following recommendations for reform. To start, this report highlights the need to end extreme sentences. Namely, we advocate for the abolishment of life without parole sentences and push for a 20-year cap on imprisonment for crimes committed by adults, except for rare circumstances, and a 15-year cap for youth and emerging adults. Life sentences condemn individuals to die in prison without considering their capacity for change over time. And research shows that people, especially youth and emerging adults, possess significant potential for rehabilitation, but these life sentences don't provide an opportunity for recognition of that growth. In a similar vein, we recommend an expansion of juvenile sentencing protections to emerging adults. So as mentioned previously, neuroscientific research finds that those under the age of 25 are not yet fully cognitively developed. They have reduced culpability in the crimes they commit, and thus should be offered less severe sentences, as well as more opportunities for sentencing relief. And then the final slate of reforms I want to uplift focuses on parole and resentencing processes. So to support parole boards in their efforts to ensure sentences are doing the work of justice, these institutions must increase in transparency in their reviews, creating more clear guidelines focusing on assessing personal transformation, as well as a consideration of age of offense, health, and other factors. And this should be accompanied by automatic sentence review processes or second look mechanisms, which include a rebuttable presumption of resentencing. All right, so that's all I have for the overview of this report. I'll turn it back to Nicole and our panelists so we can hear more on this topic and the work being done to support sentencing reform.
Thank you so much, Celeste. I hope my audio is better. I switched the way I was being able to input audio into the Zoom, so I hope that's better, and please do continue to offer feedback in the chat if you are having problems hearing. And as we go through the discussion today, I want to encourage people to use the Q&A function so that we can get to questions before we wrap up the webinar this afternoon. So again, thank you, Celeste, for your presentation. I wanted to start off with a question to everyone on the panel, Jason, Bill, Salim. What's your reaction to the findings from the latest lifer census? What's behind the numbers that people in the audience should know when it comes to life sentences, when it comes to what's needed to address life sentences, challenge life sentences? Bill, let's start with you.
Okay. For me, it's obvious that the numbers still show that Black males are the highest percentage of life sentence individuals. And for me, that has to do with socioeconomic status, inadequate representation and in the criminal justice system, and just the systemic inequalities, that we're subjected to. That's what those numbers, they seem to resonate, that, the more things change, the more they remain the same. For someone like myself who did over 3 decades in prison, to see that these numbers are still, at one time they looked like they were receding, but now it's like, wow, we're stuck at to be such a high percentage of the life sentence population is kind of heart-wrenching. And I'll leave it right there.
Thank you, Bill. Jason?
Yeah, I think for me, I see this is the 4th report that y'all have done, and you see the population and the sentences going down for people serving life without parole sentences, but not that much. So, and you would think that a life sentence is one of the biggest deterrents, right, to people committing crimes. And I would say, based on those statistics, it looks like a life sentence or life without parole sentence is not a big deterrent, obviously, right? So there's something that's wrong with that conclusion, that the more we punish, the less crime that's going to be committed. The other thing too, I would say, is that when people are incarcerated, serving life sentences, when I was in there, and I'm pretty sure Mr. Underwood as well, you have less access to rehabilitation methods, classes, educational programs. They don't allow individuals with that type of sentence to participate in other programs that are offered to other people with release dates. And, that just kind of, I think, it tells you, like in the clearest words, that you're not worth being rehabilitated. That's why you can't take this program. And, it just, there's a lot that goes on there. And when you do have a life without parole sentences, you're treated differently. And, and I think despite that, which is pretty cool to see, that when people come out of prison that are serving life sentences, whether it's through clemency or whatever that method is that we do have one of the lowest recidivism rates. Can't say why that actually is, but that's a good indicator that there's something wrong with life without parole sentences.
Salim, anything to add?
Yeah, I'll just add that for me, in this work, it's very easy sometimes to just look at statistics and numbers, especially when you're doing like impact litigation and impact advocacy, you know, when we talk about like how this litigation can free this many people or how this legislation can free this many people. When I look at those numbers, though, I look at the human aspect of it, though. You know, the other day I was looking at a spreadsheet of our inside contacts, and you know, we had assigned like 50 people serving life without parole for all of us to email contact. And I have been home, fortunately, for close to 7 years now. And as I was scrolling through the list, I didn't recognize any of the names. And I wasn't particularly looking for the names, but then I came across the name Robert Bishop. And he was, you know, on my block up at Green, and we all called him Crip, you know, because he walked with a limp. And he had been in prison. He's been in prison since 1973, before I was born. And it really just hit me like, damn, like, you know, this is Crip, you know, this, you know. So, you know, this was one of those moments for me that I just like, you know, yeah, it touched me, you know, like along this name of random people who are serving life without parole, many of them just coming into the system. You know, here it is, I run into, you know, old hood Crip who was next door to me. And there's just so many others who have been in prison for so long. And then I think about the family members. I think about the impact on our communities. I think about the waste of just warehousing so many people. So just, you know, not to veer off, because everyone really great answers on the impact in terms of the numbers. But for me, if you just ask me, what hits, it's just I see so many people, so many friends that, you know, I grew up in prison, you know, that, and so many of them guys are still in there serving life without parole. So I see the human aspect of it, which is really troublesome.
No, absolutely. And thank you so much for your comments there, Salim, and to your comments as well, Bill and Jason. And it is easy to forget when people throw around numbers that we're talking about people behind the numbers, people behind these percentages. So thank you for bringing that into the conversation, and hope that the Sentencing Project, as an organization that publishes and has published these research studies, is speaking to that throughout the study. We work on that, but we also appreciate feedback and opportunities to strengthen that work. Given the comments just shared and some of the comments already shared in the chat, you know, there's always the issue of community safety and how challenging these life sentences, how raising questions on these life sentences is advocated for in the context of community safety. So with that, asking, this is a rhetorical question, because I feel like I have good information on this already, but it's for folks in the audience, it's for folks who may come across this conversation. But why should we release people? How can we convince the general public that these changes, that challenging life sentences support community safety? Salim, can you start us off with that?
Yes, certainly. And I also want to say too, you know, I've been, you know, working with the Sentencing Project for years. And one thing I do say is in y'all impact reports, you do a good job of making sure you uplift the humanity in the prisoners. It's the vignettes that y'all have, the stories, the pictures. So just wanted to clarify that. So I was just sharing something that has been on my mind for like 2 days ever since I came across that spreadsheet and seen Crip's name. But what I would say to that is that why should these folks be rehabilitated? One is from a public safety standpoint. If we're talking about releasing people who do not present a threat to the community, you should start with the population that has the lowest recidivism rates. And those are people who have served long-term sentences and also aged out. If you look at the recidivism numbers for people, for example, in Pennsylvania, the cohort that I was a part of, the juvenile lifers, you know, there were over 500 of us serving life without parole in Pennsylvania. The average age when we were released, over 300 of us, was in the 40s, the late 40s. So far, since 2016, our recidivism rate is less than 2%. It's actually like 1.7%, right? So you're talking about out of hundreds of people that went home, only one went back for a new charge and the other person that went back for a violation. So from the standpoint of who you should start with, you should start with this population of people who have done decades in prison. And also we have the other factor, and that is the aging out factor. Again, studies and statistics show that as you get older, you age out. And when people get into their late 30s, 40s, and 50s, the recidivism number goes down. And there's one thing about like, and you know, Celeste and Ashley, who are the ones that do the statistics, they would be in a better position to talk about this. There are many different studies on the recidivism rates of older people, and many of them have different percentages. But one thing you will see across the board is that the percentages are significantly lower than other categories of people who are released, right? So this is not even like a disputable topic. And these are people who have reformed themselves, right, and redeemed themselves. And if you want to use the term rehabilitated themselves, although like I don't believe that prison rehabilitates people, people reform and redeem themselves, but they have went through what we would call all the hoops, have changed and are no longer the person that they were 30, 40, 50 years ago. California is another state. New York, if you look at the recidivism rates for the people that have served a lot of time, you'll see that it's not a threat to public safety, and it's actually good for public safety. We've seen in Philadelphia how people who were released came home, and not only did they contribute to the community, but their families also found a renewal of that the system can work, right? And it gave hope to other people to start engaging the system and saying, if they could bring home hundreds of people, then it could bring home my loved one. It could bring home my son. So we've actually had more people get involved in reforming, abolishing, dismantling, and changing this system as a result of our release. People who before were either suffering from apathy, right, or paralyzed just by the injustice, it actually increased civic participation. So those are like some of those other areas that people don't talk about. So, you know, I'll let, you know, give others space to talk in, but those are some of the real main reasons. I mean, you want someone who's going to come back to the community, contribute, and from a data and statistical standpoint, are the least likely to reoffend.
Thank you, Salim. Bill and Jason, same question. You know, not an easy one to answer, but you all have survived these sentences. So why should we be releasing people? And what in your responses can speak to the general public in helping to persuade, you know, people who aren't on this webinar about why we need to release people from these extreme sentences?
Well, okay, to
Go
Salim's
ahead,
point.
Bill, and then we'll go to.
Okay, my bad. To Salim's point, you know, for the most part, as you get older and age in prison, you sort of, it's like this organic restorative justice process happens, you know. You age out of crime, you don't have time for foolishness. You talk to the youngsters about changing their lives, especially the ones that come in with the 10-year sentences and sort of think this is a hip thing to do. You know, you try to, you endeavor to educate yourself, you know, and to the point Jason made earlier, you know, when you have life with no parole, they kind of there's a little psychological game they play that, you know, and I mean and that means the prison hierarchy, you know, with, you know, you're never going home. So these classes aren't for you. These other things aren't for you. These things that prepare people for the street, it's not for you. So you have to make the effort on your own to rehabilitate yourself, and you in that process begin to create a organic environment, and it shows the upper echelon staff, if you will, and others around you that you're a serious individual, be taken serious, who appreciates the opportunity of life and living, And you tend to begin to set the example in there. And it correlates and resonates, especially when you have the opportunity to talk with people outside, whether it's your family, friends, or other people who are interested in your story, and people begin to, when they begin to share these success stories of rehabilitative individuals, the potential for this organic restorative justice is pretty amazing, as we all exhibit, in our own way. Jason is Latindita, as am I saying it right? That's close, right? I mean, that's an amazing story. His whole neighborhood, he came home and reformed, transformed his entire neighborhood, and that's a beautiful thing. Yeah. So the potential is limitless, of individuals that have the capacity, and we need to share more of those stories and let people see that, so, all right, Jason.
Thank you so much, Bill. Thank you. Jason, did you have anything to add there?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Underwood. I greatly appreciate that, and you're so right about that, of us individuals coming back to our community, and who better to tell us what we need in our communities than those who are born and raised here. But then also too, I just seen those the reports when y'all put them up, and it just gave me cold chills, and kind of just, I read those when I was in prison, right? And they inspired me to start my own organization when I was in there. But what I want to say about the life sentences and making our community not as safe because of life sentences, it's a little different twist, and it actually pertains to the guards in there. So, when you sentence someone to life without parole, you send that person likely to a maximum security prison, which are prisons that are lack of any rehabilitation or life itself. They're environments that spell out in brutal clarity that the prisoner, that you should not want for nothing, you should not strive for nothing, you are nothing, and you should just wait on death when it calls you. It's an environment that deadens the lives of those in that prison, but also deadens the lives of those that work in that prison. I was in high security prisons for over 16 years, and I would say assaults on prisoners by staff is higher in those prisons. Suicide by staff is higher in those prisons. Domestic violence is higher by staff in those prisons. And just like myself and anyone else who goes into that prison puts on that mask to deal with that situation, the guards have to do that as well. And they don't have that ability to take off that mask when they go home and go back to their communities. So if we have less people serving or sentenced to life, then we have less institutions that are inhumane, and we have less guards that have to work in those environments. So the reality is that the less people we have serving life sentences actually makes our community safer, and the more people we have serving life sentences actually makes our communities less safe, because again, those guards are in that environment. They take that negative vibe back to their communities, back to their families, and it's a switch that you can't turn off and on. And I think it makes those guards more violent and more depressed as well.
Thank you, Jason. Very insightful. So we have a few minutes left for the panelists, and then we'll get to the questions in the Q&A. So, one question is around clemency and really any post-sentencing remedy that can surface issues around accountability. One of the main questions in nearly every, if not all, clemency petitions is an admission of guilt. And this is also embedded in parole petitions for parole eligible life sentences and other parole eligible long-term sentences. So what are the ways that in clemency or any post-sentence petition, what are the ways that accountability can be surfaced, not just for people in prison, but the system itself that contributes to the disappearance of people behind the walls to these long-term sentences? So Jason, I wanted to start with you, given your experience with clemency and the advocacy you've done on clemency, and then go to Bill and Celine.
Yes, well, I mean, I received a commutation from President Obama, and then I recently received a pardon from President Biden. And I think that, you know, especially like if you're black or brown, you grow up and you, whether this is right or wrong, you feel like society owes you, right? Especially when you go to prison serving life without parole, you definitely feel like society owes you. And when I received my commutation from President Obama, there was no inkling in me that society owed me. I felt the reverse now, like I owed society. Like I had been heard, I had been listened to by the most highest power in the, you know, in the United States that acknowledged me. And it made me feel like I got to get out and now I owe now, right? Like I got to I got to make right for what I've wronged. And I think as well, though, just as it's an admission, I never proposed or alleged that I was innocent. I was guilty for what I did. I just what I said was that I didn't deserve to die in prison. And I think that the president, obviously, President Biden and Obama both believe that, but I think it's also an admission, I would say, of a guilt on their part. Like they know that, you know what, we handled this war on drugs wrong by handing out all these life sentences, and we're going to make that right by extending this olive branch to those that were sentenced to life without parole or other harsh sentences and commute their sentences or grant them full pardons. So I think it's a give and take here, right? We know we did wrong. They know they did wrong. But now how do we make it right? And I think clemency, pardons is definitely one of the right ways to go about that.
What about that, Bill and Salim? Any thoughts to Jason's analysis on how clemency itself can be used to repair the harm associated with mass incarceration over the last 50 years? Bill, you came off mute, and then we'll go to Salim.
Okay. You know, it's encouraging to see them acknowledging in a strange sort of way that they, you know, the harm that the system has done and the possibility of change and that, you know, human growth potential that, you know, that, you know, there has been a sort of injustice done to individuals for the most part who have served these extreme sentences and have shown the potential, who've had in no other way to communicate and demonstrate the potential for growth. And this kind of restorative justice practice that they use in clemency, it's the only thing I would say to that with clemency is still when you have those for the high profile cases, you know, they still the worst part of that is that it all you know, it transitions back to the prosecutors who overrun, and we all know prosecutors are who are involved in any case, win is all they want. They don't care about whatever happens in the end. So you know, to have someone's possibility of holding on to some hope through a clemency process is kind of it dampens it, but it's at the same time it's good to see that by me myself, I didn't receive clemency. I received compassionate release under the first Trump administration because it gave the judges and all of us guys, and people that are in this position know, especially when you do a lot of law work, you know, and these legal terms and definitions and petitions you file to the court, you always, you know, the language it's similar, and you've been you know, and holding on to your Fifth, Sixth Amendment rights and taking these positions with the court to explain these situations. And it's nice to see that they came up with you know, this process by you file your administrative remedy and they have 30 days. And if they don't answer, you get an opportunity to go to the court. And for most of us, that's all we've ever wanted, was an opportunity to go to the court. And by this compassionate release gave me that. And the judge, when he reviewed, he took his time, he took 8 months. And my letters from not just family members, but prisoners that I impacted, and people that I left in the communities, that was a powerful tool, and that helped me get here. So.
Thank you, Bill. And Celine, what did you have thoughts in response to that question around clemency or any post-conviction remedy as a way to hold the system accountable that contribute, given the contributions to the circumstances that might lead to a life sentence in the first place?
I mean, certainly, I mean, clemency in Pennsylvania, we have commutation. They are all levers that the state can pull. And I think they should be pulled. I think they should be pulled more often, as they used to be prior to the rise of mass incarceration. Clemency and commutation was something that was provided readily to people who had demonstrated that they no longer needed to be housed or kept in prison. It was a very common practice across the entire country. It was actually almost like a relief valve for the system so that it could relieve overcrowding. However, the rise of mass incarceration, the mandatory sentencing, and also just the way crime has been politicized ended that. So I certainly would encourage the federal government. I would encourage people to pressure the federal government, pressure the states to do more to bring about commutation and clemency. But also, too, there's other areas that can be addressed, whether it's through litigation. Many states have rolled back life without parole sentences. Their Supreme Courts through litigation. Massachusetts is one state that recently, in 2017, ended life without parole sentences for felony murder. Illinois narrowed the circumstances which a person can get life without parole for felony murder. Minnesota has also done it. California done it in the mid-2000s, allowing people to come down who are sentenced to life without parole for resentencing hearings. Kentucky did it as well. Hawaii. A lot of this came through litigation as well as legislation. So there are certainly many areas, even in Pennsylvania right now, we have a case in front of the Pennsylvania Supreme Court that the governor submitted a brief supporting, district attorneys submitted a brief supporting that would end felony murder in Pennsylvania, which results in a life without parole sentences. And for people who don't know what felony murder is essentially if you are someone who was the lookout to an offense, the getaway driver, or did not mean or intend to kill someone, and in the course of a felony, someone was killed. So these states have successfully ended that. However, is as the report that Ashley and Celeste put together and Celeste presented on earlier, the problem, there's a lot of work to be done. We need many more states to do this. We need many more legislatures to roll back these harsh sentences and more state Supreme Courts to abolish and roll back their sentences. It's going to be really hard on the federal level just because of the makeup of the federal courts. But for me, I feel like we need to pull every lever that's available to end this sentence.
Thank you so much, Celine. And you're right, there's a lot of levers to pull to challenge life sentences. And thank you also for offering an overview of litigation and advocacy reforms that are helping to pull those levers within the state, and your reflective analysis on what might be possible at the federal level. So I'm going to turn to questions in the Q&A. There's several, so we likely won't be able to get to all of them. But this is not the end of a conversation. We hope that folks in the audience continue to stay engaged with the Sentencing Project and reach out to us to connect on any questions you may have that we may not be able to get to this afternoon. But I'm going to start with the first one. And Celeste, this is for you to speak to the research in the recent report that you presented on earlier, and anyone else on the panel who may have thoughts in reaction to this question. It's very specific to the data that may be available. And the question is, do you track how many life sentences have been applied to third strike or habitual offender guidelines?
Yeah, thank you. So unfortunately, we don't have data on those offense categories. The main categories that we were focused on were those violent crimes that we had up, and then the property and drug offenses. We know that there are, a large swath of the life sentence population that is incarcerated due to these 3 strikes habitual offender laws. And so that's something that we're thinking about considering for future research.
Jason, did you have thoughts on that? You came off mute.
I'm sorry, I was responding to some questions.
Oh, okay, no worries. Well, I'm going to move to the next question, which is from Michael Goodwin, who writes a question in the Q&A that reads, in my state, our governor controls parole and pardons board, the paroles and pardons board, and so very few receive, I'm assuming, meaningful chances at parole and pardons. Michael's question is this true in other states? Can folks speak to that in terms of how parole or pardons boards may impact the ability of release for discretionary parole and the contributions of that to what's in your numbers, Celeste?
Yeah, so one thing we are seeing, we reported that the total number of sentences of life with the possibility of parole have decreased, but what we're seeing in states across the country, Georgia, for example, they're increasing the wait times between parole hearings, and individuals who are sentenced to life with parole are also forced to wait longer before that first parole hearing. So states are making it increasingly difficult to seek parole and to seek these relief opportunities.
Any other comments or reflections on how parole is working at the federal level or within states and the impact on discretionary parole reviews? And Ms. Celine, did you have any comments on that in Pennsylvania?
Sorry, say that again, Nicole.
Just the possibility around discretionary parole in Pennsylvania and how that might be impacting long-term sentenced prisoners there, given the last question that was asked.
I mean, Pennsylvania does have for long-term prisoners in Pennsylvania, so we're including lifers and long-termers. Pennsylvania has kind of had like a steady parole release rate that depending on the offense and category usually hovers between like 54 and 60 something % of people who come up for parole are released. I would say that more than anything that has impacted Pennsylvania's parole has not particularly been internal factors. It's been external factors, unfortunately. We see that if there is like a very sensationalized case, or if someone is running for office and seeks to politicize something, then we will see parole numbers slow down. So from that standpoint, I would say that is the one. I'm not going to say it's the main driver, but it's a significant driver of parole rates in Pennsylvania. Fortunately, though, despite the massive problems that we have in Pennsylvania, our prison population has really significantly been reduced, practically by 17,000 people. The problem is, though, that we are not seeing people with the long-term sentences coming up, and that is not a discretionary problem. It's a mandatory minimum problem, mandatory sentencing problem. The parole board doesn't have the discretion. The parole board doesn't have the power to parole many people. We don't have, not only do we have life without parole in Pennsylvania, but we don't have what you would call good time. So someone that has a 30 to 60 years sentence, you're doing 30 years, you know what I mean, as your minimum. So those really impact Pennsylvania's discretionary parole practices, and further the need for why we need parole reform, but also we need, to our earlier question, use clemency and commutation.
Thank you, Celine. Well, there's a lot of activity in the chat. People have ideas. People have thought-provoking questions. I think the last question that we'll get to this afternoon is, what can people in the audience do? You know, people have joined. There are people in the audience who are raising up the experiences of family members of children who are currently serving life sentences, others who are clearly active community members in one way or another. So what is you all's advice for what people in the audience can do to help challenge life sentences, challenge mass incarceration, and continue the conversation long after this call is over? Bill, we'll start with you. You came off mute there.
Starting with me? Okay, they have to get engaged by you know, talking to their congresspersons, you know, the senators, their local leaders. The technology allows us now, you know, through social media and community events to amplify the messages, you know, especially if it's a personal thing with a loved one of yours. You know, there are different organizations that you can become involved with. Of course, the Sentencing Project is one. FAM is another, and there are just organizations in general that are out there in the space that are more than willing to engage with you if you're because this is you know, you have other countries that have led the way in this life sentence challenge, and countries like Norway, Germany, and the Netherlands, Amsterdam, you know, Amsterdam and all those, they believe when you come in with an extreme sentence that you have your time now. Once you enter the system, we have to prepare you for whenever you leave. And so they look to this extreme sentence. For them, the extreme sentence is 20 years. You know, they for the most part, the life without parole does not exist, in that because it serves no purpose in society. You know, and to get a 20-year sentence, you have to do something really, really horrific. You know, and those countries, and those are civilized countries that look to foster progressive and, as I said, restorative practices within the justice system, or their justice system. So volunteering, donating, and raising awareness, you know, in our collective community, you know, and you have to stay on your congressperson and your local representative and your senators. You know, don't let them just get away with having a great opportunity to foster themselves, but to, you know, make sure that they adhere to their responsibility. You know, they took an oath to uphold the Constitution, and yeah, you know, the part of their job is to you know, help in every way they can. If their constituents are concerned with extreme sentences, then they have to be concerned with extreme sentences. And I would say that.
Thank you, Bill.
It could start.
Thank you, Bill. Jason, how can people in the audience continue to support this issue, challenge life sentences, even after the end of the webinar today?
Yeah, well, Rhonda asked you, that's a good question. Rhonda asked you, once she asked, I'm thinking she has a family member incarcerated, because once she says, can a prison staff write a referral letter? From my understanding, they can. I don't think that there's any policy that prevents that, but I think that's probably independent on each prison. And she also asked, how can you start an organization in prison? So when I say I started an organization, it wasn't an actual 501c3. It was kind of more like just an organic movement. It wasn't filed with the state or anything like that. But what I did was I advocated for myself. I got my family involved to advocate for me and other individuals that were serving life without parole sentences for crack cocaine offenses. And when I came out of prison, it was like this golden moment for us where we were having vigils, we were rallying in front of the White House, the Department of Justice, we were lobbying, we were putting petitions online, we created Facebook pages. We brought people that were incarcerated through social media. We brought them alive to an extent, right? We took them from behind the wall and brought them outside the wall, where we were doing profiles, having taped conversations of them on the telephone. But if you go to I have a website, getclemencynow.org, and there's a book on there. You can download it for free. It teaches you and your loved ones incarcerated how to advocate for their freedom.
So individual advocacy, direct actions are a way. There are organizations. People have shared in the chat resources from FAM. And Bill, you talked about the fact that people shouldn't just stop. You know, they have to continue to advocate and reach out to their lawmakers. So there are things that people can be doing. Celine, what can people in the audience do after this webinar ends to continue to challenge life sentences and challenge mass incarceration?
Yeah, I mean, I think I just echo everything that Bill and Jason said. I would really encourage people to connect with organizations in their state that are doing work to end mass incarceration, that are doing work to end life without parole. I'm really confident that there is definitely an organization in each state. You know, if you don't know the name of your organization, you should do, Google. Sometimes it's as easy as Googling that. Also, FAM is an organization that's really involved in organizing families who have loved ones serving life sentences across the country. So that is an organization too that I would encourage people to connect with. In Pennsylvania, if you're interested in mobilizing around this issue, you could find the Abolitionist Law Center. You could just Google us and go to our website, and we have go up into the menu, and you'll be able to find a form that allows you to get involved in our work. You just fill it out, and we'll plug you into our monthly meetings. We'll plug you into our legislative advocacy. So that's one way to get involved too, specifically in your Pennsylvania.
And Bill has shared in the chat that CURE is an organization. Many states have CURE chapters, and CURE from the 70s to now has been anchoring the call to challenge life sentences, challenge other extreme sentences. Celeste, any contributions? And for people in the audience, any suggestions for people in the audience on what they can do to challenge life sentences? You gave a great overview in terms of the policy recommendations found in the report, but is there anything you really want people to remember as we close out the webinar this afternoon?
Yeah, I think, just continuing to share the stories of your loved ones, with your representatives, but also your friends and other family and community members. The report that we shared shows the massive scale, like the 200,000 individuals serving life sentences. But really uplifting the individual stories of people that are experiencing these sentences and showing the lack of humanity in the system that we're currently operating in, to just continue to grow this movement and continue to share the support that we need for these communities.
Thank you, Celeste. Thank you, Jason. Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Celine, for joining us this afternoon, being in conversation. Thank you to everyone in the chat who was so active in sharing your experiences and your suggestions and your questions on ways to challenge mass incarceration and challenge life sentences. Unfortunately, we didn't have time to get to all of the questions, but the conversation does not stop here. We will follow up this webinar with a link to the recording of the webinar, with a link to to Celeste's presentation. People have asked for the chat. We have done that before, and we can likely do that this time in sharing a downloaded transcript of the chat. So there are several resources that we will follow up with this webinar on, and we want to continue to follow up and be a resource and a support to all of you. We are committed to this work. We will continue this work, and there are things for all of us to be doing now and tomorrow and beyond to challenge life sentences. So thank you for joining us, and we'll be in touch.